This time on Landmarks, we celebrate a very private life going public. We turn cold as ice in Austria. Russia pays tribute to a significant British leader. And Australia's desert offers ancient knowledge to modern medicine. But first, in the media, sometimes the most mundane stories evolve into something you could never predict. This one is poignant. It's about a window washer on a New York skyscraper. His name was Rocco Kamali, a Macedonian immigrant living in New York. He had a job he loved and worked 5 days a week between 1973 and September 2001. Amid the Big Apple's hustle and bustle, his was often a quiet world, amongst the birds where he could take in a spectacular view. His address? The World Trade Center, also known as the Twin Towers. Rocco was one of the 2,750 people who died when the complex was destroyed by terrorists on September 11, 2001. But before that tragic day, which for many changed the world forever, the story of the World Trade Center was largely one of triumph. From the time their planning began in 1960, the Twin Towers were a masterwork of modern construction. They held the title of the world's tallest building for 2 years in the 1970s. The Twin Towers were a continuation of the great New York building tradition, which in the early 20th century saw the construction of such greats as the Empire State and Chrysler buildings. The complex became best known for its iconic 110-story Twin Towers. The World Trade Center was so large, it had its own zip code, 10048. In reality, it was a complex of 7 buildings in Lower Manhattan. The first tenants moved in December 1970, and by the time the ribbon-cutting ceremony was performed on April 4, 1973, the building had cost $900 million. During the 1990s, nearly 500 companies, including many of the world's best known, had offices in the complex. On a typical weekday, 50,000 people worked in the towers, with another 200,000 passing through as visitors. The building contains several architectural firsts. The building's core, which housed the elevator and utility shafts, supported the weight of the entire building. The floors supported their own weight, as well as live loads, providing lateral stability to the exterior walls and distributed wind loads. The floors consisted of 10-centimetre thick lightweight concrete slabs laid on a fluted steel deck. To solve the problem of wind sway or vibration, Chief Engineer Leslie Robertson took an unusual approach. Instead of bracing the buildings corner to corner, the towers were essentially hollow steel tubes surrounding a central core, with perimeter columns sharing the loads. But even before their final destruction, the Twin Towers were already a target. In February 1993, a truck filled with 700 kilos of explosives was detonated underground, ripping a 30-metre hole through 5 levels of concrete. 6 people died and thousands struggled for air in the tower shafts. On that fateful day in September 2001, Rocco Kamali left behind many heartbroken friends and family.
He loved his job. It was just him in the sky up there. No one bothered him, and he didn't bother nobody. It was his own words.
It was decided soon after the attacks that the centre would be rebuilt, and a worldwide competition was conducted to find a suitable design. Architect Daniel Liebeskin's Memory Foundations was the winner. The 5-tower design includes the 541-metre Freedom Tower. The height becomes more meaningful when translated into feet. The tower will be 1,776 feet high, the year the American War of Independence began. Coming up, living in glass houses. In his lifetime, American Philip Johnson was to many an enigma, an icon of architectural modernism who, for many of his 98 years, lived in the public domain. But despite designs such as the Sculpture Garden at New York's Museum of Modern Art, he captured the public imagination with a building that few were privileged to see or visit, his home, the Glass House. The house was built by Johnson in 1949 in New Canaan, Connecticut. The only way to see the all-glass construction was by receiving an exclusive invitation from the man who lived there. Finally, 3 years after his death in 2005, the see-through construction was opened to the public.
The whole thing about a glass house is that it's like a great camping trip. You're here, but you don't have to carry your camping equipment with you, and you can relax in your birthday suit and enjoy outside.
Now that it's open to the public, Dorothy Dunn, the director of the visitor experience for the Glass House, says visitors are flocking to see the structure.
During the inaugural year of the public opening of the Philip Johnson Glass House, we're welcoming guests who have been waiting their entire careers for access to this great property that was very protected as a private home, where the only access was by invitation from Philip Johnson, to now a public destination. So we're a pilgrimage site. People are coming, they're quiet, they're tearing up. It's very moving, personally moving.
Despite his very public life, the one-time dean of the American Architectural Institute lived in a house that was hidden from public view, behind a stone wall overlooking a pond, sitting on his 47-acre estate with rolling hills. The Glass House is a masterpiece of minimalist design. Influenced by the early 1920s German design movement, which championed the use of glass, the exterior is made of glass and charcoal painted steel.
And for those people who've been to the site, you can't fully anticipate how it will transform you. And Johnson himself was a big believer in the power of architecture to wrap itself around you and to bring you to a very personal emotional response to place, to experience. And this is what we're offering at this site now.
The interior is divided by low walnut cabinets. A brick cylinder contains the bathroom and is the only object to reach from the floor to the ceiling. The effect is a structure of simple yet beautiful geometry and proportion, transparent but reflective. Johnson himself was a controversial figure. Some say he was better known for sheer force of presence than his individual buildings. He was already a notable public figure when he joined the department which created New York's Museum of Modern Art in 1930. Other notable Johnson structures on the property include the Brick House, the Sculpture Gallery, and the Painting Gallery, where works by Frank Stella, Andy Warhol, and other legendary artists can be found. Johnson grew to become an elder statesman of American architecture. In 1978, he was awarded a gold medal by the American Institute of Architects, an organisation of which he was once the dean. But those who discount his design legacy have to ignore works such as the Lincoln Center for Performing Arts and the Museum of Pre-Columbian Art in Washington. Then there was his contribution to intellectual life, thousands of essays, papers, and public talks. The Glass House was declared a National Trust landmark in 1997. There's been no shortage of stories on famous buildings in this series, many of them modern skyscrapers. And we've also seen the many ways people recreate their images in drawing, sand, and even chocolate. But one of our favourites are the ice sculptors. Austria's second biggest city, Graz, hosted the inaugural Ice Art World Championships. And as a result, the city was transformed by a wonderful display of frozen statues of some of the world's most famous landmarks. The story began 6 years ago, when ice sculptor and organiser of the event, Gert J. Hurdle, created an ice nativity scene for the city. Since then, thousands of tourists have flocked to the city each year to marvel at the transient beauty of figures captured in ice. After this success, the city of Graz asked Hurdle to create the Ice Art World Championship. It took him 14 months of planning to bring this event to one of the best preserved old towns in Europe. Prior to the competition, 15 well-known buildings and symbols from around the world were created in ice and were put on display in the city centre. I'm building the ice crib for the 8th time here in Graz. This ice crib is the only one worldwide in these dimensions and size. I've got 45 tonnes of ice altogether. The speciality this year is the huge ice blocks. One block weighs 1,250 kilograms. We had to have special logistics. Gert Hurdle's designs took him and 6 other sculptors 2 weeks to carve in Brussels. Even after all the hard work and planning, things can still go wrong. Gert came close to seeing one of his creations shattered on top of him. Once the sculptures arrived from Brussels, it was time to put them in place in the city centre. The quality of the ice used in making these sculptures is very important. It has to be crystal clear, and this is achieved by freezing it from the bottom up over an extended period of time. The public could watch as the sculptors put the finishing touches to the ice carvings. One of London's famous landmarks, Big Ben, drew a large crowd of onlookers as it was being assembled. For the winning team, the award is €5,000. Runners-up will receive €3,000 and for third place, €2,000. But the idea of this competition is not only to see who is the best in the world, but also to bring the art of ice carving to the people as they can watch each team in action. For me, there is a need to bring all these ice sculptures to the public, to stay in Herrengasse for as long as the public want to look at them. The figures, the sculptures that are going to be carved during the World Championship will also remain here for the public to view at no cost. Coming up, the Lavadia Palace. Even from a distance, his figure was unmistakable. Winston Churchill remains one of the most significant world leaders of the 20th century. It is legend that as Britain stood alone in the darkest days of World War II, it was Churchill's steely demeanour and determination that was a major factor in the country standing firm against overwhelming odds. Now his one-time ally and many times enemy, Russia, has recognised and paid tribute to the man that was Winston Churchill. A room in the ornate Lavadia Palace in the Crimean resort of Yalta has been dedicated to the life and career of the British statesman. For 1 week in early February 1945, Churchill, Soviet leader Joseph Stalin and US President Franklin D. Roosevelt redrew the map of Europe in the Lavadia Palace. It was one of a series of conferences that contributed to the final defeat of Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan. The Palace Museum, which formerly served as a summer residence for Russian Tsar Nicholas II, has received a collection of books, CD-ROMs, videos and documents to enable visitors to better understand the British leader. A bust of Churchill has also been donated to the collection by his daughter, Mary Soames.
And it's a great opportunity to remember Churchill, who was voted in a BBC poll in 2003 the greatest Briton of all time. And I hope this means that many more people from Ukraine will get to know about Churchill.
At the Yalta talks, the Big Three faced hard decisions on the future of Europe. At the time, Nazi Germany was being squeezed in an Allied vice, but not yet defeated. While the armies of the Western Allies had stalled on the River Rhine following the fierce Battle of the Bulge, the Soviets stood on the River Oder, barely 40 miles east of Berlin. But as history later showed, it was Russia who had the advantage at that critical time. They won the race to Berlin, and the Yalta Conference resulted in the post-war map that Stalin wanted. It is impossible to minimise the importance of what they did in February 1945. While the war had not yet finished, it does not matter how one views this event through the years. We also have plans to open Stalin's room by the 60th anniversary of the Crimea Yalta Conference in 2005. As Churchill later recalled, we had the world at our feet, 25 million men marching at our orders. We seemed to be friends. But it was also Churchill who later described the division of Europe between Western democratic governments and the Soviet-dominated communist regimes as though an iron curtain had descended across the continent. While Churchill's greatness as a wartime leader was undoubted, Britons did not see him as the man they wanted at the resumption of peacetime. By that time, his political career had stretched longer than 50 years. Besides including 2 world wars and the Great Depression, he saw the development of the airplane from paper to the jet engine and the birth of radio and television. But even opponents would have been wary of writing the great man off. Churchill was to regain power one last time in 1951 and was to revisit Russia and Stalin with the then US President Truman one last time in 1952. He died in 1964 at the age of 90. Since then, scientists have searched for the so-called Churchill gene, the one that enables a man to smoke improbably large cigars and drink a sizable amount of whiskey on a daily basis and still live 9 decades. Australia is the world's only island continent and is home to many famous natural landmarks. The Great Barrier Reef is one of the few natural phenomena to be clearly seen from space. It stretches 3,000 kilometres, and scientists and medical researchers are still unlocking its secrets. In contrast, in the dead centre of the country is an equally awe-inspiring yet very different entity, Uluru, a unique 15 square kilometre freestanding rock. It rates as a must-see and feel attraction. The red desert sands of the Australian outback are one of the few unexplored resources of modern medicine. Aborigines have lived there for over 60,000 years, gathering a vast reservoir of bush medicine lore, little of which has been extensively tested by modern science. Aboriginal elders, like Vincent Forrester, say they have a cure for many ailments. Even warts can be killed off with the help of the thorns of the dead Finnish bush. The seed pods of this plant are also used to make flatbread.
Well, when you look around the desert park, you walk around in the bush, you have a look at all the pretty flowers, but those pretty flowers, that's our supermarket, that's our pharmacy, all wrapped up in one. That information is taught from the grandmother down to the grandchildren. She is the person who has the knowledge of all these plants and all that you will see around in the bush there. They are the keepers of the intellectual property.
It is knowledge built on countless generations of experience, but in the last 2 centuries, many scholars have published cultural information from Indigenous people without asking for approval first. This has stopped Aborigines from sharing a lot of their knowledge, especially details on bush medicine. Elders like Forrester are adamant that their traditional information should not be handed out to anyone and instead needs the protection of intellectual property rights.
There's hundreds of them. Aboriginal people have known about lots of different plants, lots of ones that we still don't know about, but we're yet to find a lot of them and what they're good for. So here at the park we go out and look for different types of plants that might be useful to people in their gardens. But Aboriginal people have had this knowledge for tens of thousands of years, so for them it's nothing new.
3 years ago, a far-reaching ethno-pharmacological study of Australian medicinal plants was begun, aimed at documenting the medical knowledge of elders in the Yagul community. These researchers are unlike previous scientists. They are working with Indigenous communities to protect their intellectual rights, something that has put them at the forefront of an international movement on the issue. They are scientifically testing a wide range of plants that Aboriginal elders have said are particularly potent, working on well-known plants such as the leafless ballot, as well as some previously unidentified specimens. Joanne Jamie, senior researcher of the project, says their team was approached by the Aboriginal community in a bid to document information that was being lost.
This is regarded as a very important issue because this knowledge is being lost, and it's being lost in part, unfortunately, because elderly members of the communities that have this information are dying, and also because communities, social changes are actually undergoing dislocations. So there's actually a real need by the communities to have this information documented for its preservation, for its cultural purposes.
The research team is hopeful of finding new cures for illnesses, but just as important to them is ensuring that any medicinal agents they produce will be internationally patented. It's hoped that this is the beginning of a project that takes ancient knowledge to the modern world.